Imagine this. You're deep in the Arctic, surrounded by endless snow and ice. The wind is biting, the temperature is well below freezing, and then you see it, a massive white figure moving in the distance, a polar bear, the world's largest land predator, and it's coming toward you. What would you do? Without protection, your odds of surviving an attack are less than 10%. These creatures are fast, powerful, and relentless. But for thousands of years, one group of people has mastered the art of survival against them, the Inuit. Living in some of the harshest conditions on Earth, the Inuit didn't just survive alongside polar bears. They learned how to outthink them, using generations of knowledge passed down through storytelling, tracking, and clever survival tactics. They developed strategies that we're only beginning to understand today. As climate change forces more polar bears onto land, encounters between humans and these powerful predators are increasing, and the ancient survival skills of the Inuit may be more important now than ever. How did they do it? Let's find out. For thousands of years, the Inuit have lived in the Arctic, a land where survival is a daily challenge. Among the many threats they faced, one of the most formidable was the polar bear. Unlike other predators, polar bears are not just opportunistic scavengers. They are skilled hunters, capable of tracking prey over vast distances. Yet, despite this danger, the Inuit found ways to coexist with these powerful animals. Today, an estimated 22,000 to 31,000 polar bears roam the Arctic, with the largest populations, around 16,000, found in the Canadian Arctic. In the same region, about 65,000 Inuit live in 53 communities, many of which are located within prime polar bear territory. This overlap has led to frequent encounters between humans and bears, a reality the Inuit have navigated for generations. Long before modern weapons and technology, the Inuit developed an intimate understanding of polar bear behavior. They observed the bears' hunting patterns, learned their habits, and created strategies to avoid unnecessary conflict. Rather than seeing polar bears as mindless threats, they respected them as intelligent and predictable creatures. This knowledge was passed down through generations, ensuring that each new hunter, trapper, and community member understood how to recognize danger and react accordingly. But in recent decades, the balance of this ancient coexistence has begun to shift. Climate change is rapidly altering the Arctic landscape, melting the sea ice that polar bears rely on for hunting. As a result, more bears are being forced onto land, where they come into closer contact with Inuit communities. In Nunavut, wildlife officials record between 300 and 800 polar bear encounters each year, numbers that have risen dramatically compared to past decades. In some areas, such as Arviat on the western shore of Hudson Bay, residents report seeing polar bears near their homes at least once a week during the ice-free season. In the 1980s, a typical coastal community might have reported 20 to 30 bear encounters per year. Today, some settlements deal with hundreds annually. The increased interactions between humans and bears have made traditional Inuit knowledge more important than ever. While modern technology can provide some protection, the survival strategies developed over centuries remain some of the most effective tools for avoiding and managing polar bear encounters. The Inuits' first and most important defense against polar bears was not weapons or physical barriers, it was awareness. By mastering the ability to detect a bear long before it got close, they could avoid dangerous encounters altogether. One of their most remarkable skills was reading wind patterns to locate bears before ever seeing them. Hunters would wet their fingers and hold them up to the air, feeling for even the slightest shifts in wind direction. They built small snow piles and carefully observed how loose snow was carried by the wind, revealing hidden air currents. These techniques allowed them to determine whether a bear's scent was being carried toward them, sometimes detecting a bear from over 2 kilometers away. Tracking was another critical survival skill. To the untrained eye, a polar bear's tracks might seem like simple imprints in the snow, but for the Inuit, they were a detailed story waiting to be read. They could determine the size of a bear from the depth and width of its prints. The spacing between tracks indicated its speed and intent. A straight, direct path suggested a hunting bear, while meandering tracks meant a bear was wandering without a specific target. Even the freshness of the prints could tell them if the bear was nearby or had passed through hours earlier. Perhaps one of the most astonishing Inuit skills was their ability to recognize different types of bear-breathing sounds. They could distinguish between the slow, steady breathing of a curious bear, the quick, shallow pants of a frightened bear likely to run away, and the deep, throaty growls of an aggressive bear. An unmistakable sign that it was time to act. By combining these techniques, wind reading, tracking, and sound recognition, the Inuit could detect a bear long before it saw them. This allowed them to plan their movements, avoid risky areas, and stay one step ahead of one of the Arctic's most dangerous predators. For the Inuit, managing food and scent was one of the most critical aspects of polar bear survival. With a sense of smell so powerful that it can detect a seal from 20 miles away, a hungry polar bear could easily be drawn to the slightest scent of food. To prevent this, the Inuit developed sophisticated methods to store and cook their food while minimizing the risk of attracting bears. The first rule of food storage was simple: never keep food near living areas. Instead, the Inuit created specialized storage caches downwind from their camps. These caches were often built on raised platforms made from ice blocks or stacked stones, keeping food elevated and harder for bears to access. Some communities even used multiple food storage sites, spreading out supplies so that no single location became an irresistible target. Seal oil lamps, a crucial source of heat and light, also had to be carefully managed. Their strong scent could travel far, potentially luring in bears from miles away. To counter this, the Inuit positioned their lamps so that smoke and odors were carried away from their main living areas by the prevailing wind. In particularly dangerous seasons, they built snow-block wind barriers to further disperse the scent, confusing any bears attempting to track it. Cooking required an equally strategic approach. Rather than preparing meals in open-air settings where scents could travel freely, the Inuit often cooked in separate areas away from their main camp. In some cases, they built enclosed snow kitchens with ventilation tunnels designed to channel cooking smells away from their settlements. One of their most ingenious methods involved using moss to mask food odors. By burning specific types of moss alongside their cooking fires, they created a layer of smoke that helped disguise the scent of meat, reducing the chances of attracting unwanted visitors. Traditional food preservation techniques also played a role in scent control. Instead of drying meat in the open air, the Inuit aged it inside carefully built stone caches packed with snow. This not only kept the food fresh, but also minimized the release of strong odors that could alert nearby bears. In the Arctic, shelter isn't just about staying warm, it's about staying safe. The Inuit understood that a well-designed settlement could mean the difference between life and death when living alongside polar bears. Through centuries of experience, they developed structures and defensive techniques that protected them from even the largest and most determined bears. One of their most iconic structures, the igloo, was more than just a winter shelter. It was a fortress. Its dome shape wasn't just designed for insulation, it was also incredibly strong, capable of withstanding the weight of a full-grown polar bear if one attempted to climb on top. The entrance tunnel was intentionally built, narrow and low, making it nearly impossible for a bear's broad shoulders to squeeze through. Some igloos even featured multiple chambers and tight turns, creating a maze-like layout that frustrated and slowed down any intruding bear. Strategic placement was another key aspect of Inuit settlements. Camps were always built on elevated ground with clear sight lines in all directions, allowing people to spot approaching bears before they got too close. Whenever possible, the Inuit positioned their shelters near natural ice ridges and uneven terrain, areas that bears typically avoided because they made movement more difficult. To create an early warning system, the Inuit developed an ingenious natural alarm: packed snow pathways. Around their shelters, they would carefully compress snow in certain areas, creating paths that made distinct crunching sounds when walked on. Different paths had different textures, some packed tighter for a deeper crunch, others looser for a softer sound, allowing the Inuit to recognize exactly where a bear was approaching from, even in total darkness. In areas with frequent bear activity, the community organized night watch shifts. But these weren't just silent guard duties. The watchmen would use the time to tell stories, carve tools, or teach younger members of the community about polar bear behavior. These night shifts weren't just about security. They were a way to ensure survival knowledge was continuously passed down through generations. The layout of Inuit villages was also carefully planned for safety. Homes were often arranged in a circular pattern, with clear lines of sight between buildings, preventing blind spots where bears could sneak up unnoticed. Storage areas were placed on the outskirts of the settlement, keeping food sources away away from sleeping areas. Multiple escape routes were always maintained, with paths kept clear even during heavy snowfall, ensuring that if a bear did approach, people had an easy way to flee. Through a combination of intelligent shelter design, natural alarm systems, and strategic village planning, the Inuit turned their settlements into well-defended spaces, ensuring that even in the presence of one of the Arctic's most fearsome predators, they could sleep soundly at night. In the Arctic, avoiding a polar bear was always the first priority. But when a confrontation became unavoidable, the Inuit had a set of highly effective defensive strategies and weapons to protect themselves. Relying on generations of knowledge, they developed specialized tools, trained animals for defense, and even constructed physical barriers to increase their chances of survival. One of the most impressive Inuit weapons was the nuliak, a specialized spear designed specifically for polar bear encounters. Measuring around 7 feet long, it was crafted from seasoned driftwood or whalebone, chosen for its strength and flexibility in extreme cold. The spearhead, often made from walrus ivory or bone, featured barbs that would break off inside the bear, creating a traceable blood trail if the bear fled. Some versions even had a quick-release mechanism, allowing the hunter to detach the shaft if a bear grabbed it, leaving the barbed head embedded while they escaped. While weapons were crucial, the Inuit also relied on sled dogs as an early warning system. These dogs weren't just used for transportation. They were trained to detect polar bears from long distances, alerting their owners with specific barks and body language. In dangerous situations, they would form a defensive circle around their humans, barking aggressively to deter an approaching bear. Some lead dogs were even capable of distinguishing between male and female bear scents, signaling different warnings depending on the level of danger. Beyond weapons and animals, the Inuit also built physical barriers and alarm systems to enhance their safety. One of their cleverest warning systems involved strings of hollow seal bones strung together. These were positioned around camps so that when a bear walked through, the bones would rattle in the wind, providing an early alert to its presence. Defensive structures were another layer of protection. Using ice blocks, the Inuit constructed narrow passageways leading into settlements. If a bear charged through, these tight spaces slowed it down, giving defenders time to react. Some communities even built multi-layered barriers, forcing a bear to maneuver through multiple obstacles before reaching their main living areas. But maintaining these tools and defenses in the Arctic's extreme conditions required constant upkeep. Spear shafts were regularly treated with seal oil to prevent cracking in freezing temperatures, and spare weapons were stored in special snow caches to keep them at a stable temperature. When the Inuit began acquiring metal weapons through trade, they wrapped spearheads in seal skin to prevent them from becoming brittle in the cold. The Arctic is a land of extremes, where each season brings new challenges, not just from the freezing temperatures, but from the shifting behavior of polar bears. The Inuit understood that bear encounters were not random. They followed predictable seasonal patterns. By carefully observing these changes over generations, they adapted their survival strategies to match the different dangers of each season. Spring was the most dangerous season for polar bear encounters. After months of fasting through the harsh winter, bears emerged hungry and aggressive, desperate to rebuild their fat reserves. This period was so treacherous that the Inuit called it the time of hungry shadows, a reference to the bears' relentless search for food. During this season, the Inuit doubled their safety measures. They established strict travel rules, ensuring that people always moved in groups and avoided wandering alone. Hunting trips were carefully planned, taking place only during the brightest parts of the day, when bears were less active. Camps were set up in elevated locations with clear sight lines, allowing them to detect approaching bears well in advance. As the Arctic sea ice melted, polar bears were forced onto land, bringing them into closer contact with Inuit settlements. During the summer months, bear activity was at its peak near the coast, as they searched for food along shorelines. To avoid unnecessary encounters, the Inuit moved their settlements inland, away from the coastal areas where bears frequently roamed. Travel routes were also carefully adjusted, ensuring that they avoided known denning areas and natural feeding grounds. Instead of hunting seals on the ice, which became too dangerous in warmer months, the Inuit shifted their focus to caribou and fish, reducing the risk of competing with bears for food. In the fall, polar bears were at their most active, hunting constantly to build up fat reserves before winter. However, their movements followed predictable patterns, which the Inuit studied over generations. They mapped out high-risk areas, marking locations where bears frequently traveled and hunted. Using cairns and rock piles, they created visual warning markers, alerting others to avoid these zones. Some communities maintained bear calendars, keeping records of when and where bears had been spotted in previous years. This allowed them to predict future bear movements with impressive accuracy. Winter brought 24-hour darkness, making it even more difficult to detect approaching bears. But the Inuit had remarkable techniques for staying safe, even in near-total blackness. They became experts at reading ice patterns, knowing that certain formations, like pressure ridges, were favorite hunting spots for bears stalking seals. By feeling the snow density with their feet, they could identify areas where bears were likely hiding. Some camps were positioned near naturally occurring ice formations that amplified sound, allowing them to hear approaching bears from far away. Others built special snow walls around their camps, designed to reflect even the faintest moonlight, creating better visibility in the darkness. Through these seasonal adaptations, the Inuit developed a dynamic survival strategy, constantly adjusting to the changing Arctic environment. Instead of relying on a single approach, they adapted their behavior, travel patterns, and settlements to match the shifting habits of polar bears, ensuring their survival across the harshest conditions on Earth. For centuries, the Inuit have relied on their deep understanding of polar bears to survive in the Arctic. Today, as climate change transforms the region, scientists and wildlife experts are finally beginning to recognize the value of this ancient knowledge. While researchers have long studied polar bears using satellite tracking and radio collars, many are now turning to traditional Inuit tracking techniques for a more detailed understanding of bear behavior. Unlike technology, which can only provide location data, Inuit hunters can read the snow like a newspaper, interpreting bear movements, hunting strategies, and even their emotional state based on subtle details like track spacing and depth. Scientists studying bear populations in Canada, Greenland, and Alaska have started working alongside Inuit hunters, incorporating their wind-reading techniques, scent detection methods, and tracking expertise into modern conservation efforts. In some Arctic regions, wildlife officials now consult local Inuit communities to predict bear movements more accurately than satellite data alone. Their ability to detect bears before they are seen has proven especially valuable in understanding how climate change is altering bear migration patterns. As Arctic sea ice continues to shrink, polar bears are being forced to spend more time on land, leading to a dramatic increase in human-bear encounters. In some Inuit villages, where bears were once a rare sight, they are now seen on a weekly basis. This shift has made Inuit survival skills more important than ever, not just for Arctic communities, but for scientists, conservationists, and even tourists venturing into polar bear country. Modern deterrents like electric fences and firearms offer some protection, but they are not always reliable in extreme Arctic conditions. As a result, many experts now recommend using a combination of modern tools and traditional Inuit methods, such as tracking bears from a distance, understanding their body language, and managing food storage strategically to prevent drawing them too close to human settlements. For thousands of years, the Inuit have survived in one of the most extreme environments on Earth, not through brute force, but through understanding, respect, and deep knowledge of the natural world. Rather than seeing polar bears as simple threats, they studied them, learned their behavior, and developed strategies to avoid conflict whenever possible. When danger was unavoidable, they relied on carefully crafted tools, teamwork, and an intimate knowledge of the Arctic landscape to stay alive. But as the world changes, so does the balance between humans and polar bears. Climate shifts are forcing these powerful predators closer to Inuit communities, making their ancient survival skills more relevant than ever. Today, scientists and wildlife experts are finally recognizing what the Inuit have known for generations, that technology alone isn't enough. True survival comes from learning, adapting, and respecting the forces of nature.